Let me break a hard truth to you real quick, and it's gonna be really tough for me as a dude to say, but size does matter. Don't let anybody lie to you. Size absolutely matters. And when it comes to our micro fleet, like this one that I fly a lot, that's the pork chop, this is the size that you want for your HD video. Hey everybody, I'm Big Ninja, and today I want to talk to you about something that not everybody gets excited about, but I do, and that is small things. I love small things, and like I said in the intro, size does matter. When it comes to small things in drones, I like to fly micros. This is my pork chop build. If you haven't seen it before, it is a custom toothpick, a freestyle design toothpick. It's a 3-inch on some really nice FPVCycle motors and an HX115 BetaFPV frame, Darwin AIO. But the best thing about this quad is it's digital. It's a 3-inch 1S, 2S digital freestyle toothpick. And in order to accomplish that digital video output, there's not a lot of options in the market today. We've got some walk snail offerings in the 1S range. They're fairly new, but we also have HDZero. And I fly a lot of HDZero. Now this is the Whoop Lite video transmitter. And before we get into what this is, because you've probably seen it before, it's not necessarily new on the market. What we're gonna talk about today is all the complaints that I hear about breaking these things, about durability problems with HDZero VTXs. I haven't had that, so I'm gonna show you how I'm mounting them, how I think you should be properly mounting them in order to get the best lifespan out of these expensive digital components. But first, let's just go over what this video transmitter actually is, in case you have been living under some flea-infested rock and haven't heard of it, or just don't get on the internet very often, which makes me wonder why you're here watching a YouTube video right now, but I'm not gonna ask too many questions. Let's take a look at this thing. And if we just open the box on this thing here, the first thing you see is stickers. Some nice HDZero VBatt stickers. And these things are literally all over my house because my son sticks them everywhere. I've got them on my floors, on my chairs, on my walls. Thank you, VBatt, for infesting my house with sticker remnants. And directly under the stickers, we have the VTX itself. Now, this is not the Whoop Lite kit, it is just the VTX. And you can see that this VTX has some nice shielding on the top and the bottom. Really nice shielding. This shielding is removable so you can make the board naked and smaller. It has some side-mounted soldering pads for your UART connectivity, your power connectivity, all that good stuff for MSP and smart audio. On the bottom, we have the micro UFL connector, and then we have the MIPI connector, and more access to the pads if you need a little bit more room than we have up here on the top of it. We also have the programming port, which we'll get to here in a minute. And digging further into this box, we get some goodies. And this is where we're going to start to talk about mounting, because you see gummies in here. This board does come with some gummies. It also comes with some silicone wire to do all your connectivity. And it comes with this programming cable here, which is very important because it fits the Whoop Lite VTX, as well as this little board here at the bottom. You can kind of see that adapts the standard programming cable size to the Whoop Lite programming cable size. That is a necessity for using this VTX. And that is all you get in the box for your 54 bucks with the Whoop Lite VTX. Pretty much the bare essentials. Now they do have another kit that comes with a camera for $99 that also includes a small MIPI cable for use on micros only. It is not very long at all. And a little dipole UFL antenna just to get you in the air super quickly. Now for my pork chop, I am running the Whoop Lite camera and the Whoop Lite VTX. Obviously I'm not running a dipole antenna. I'm using a right-hand circular polarized antenna because I prefer that, but that is the kit I'm running in the pork chop. Now, this VTX does not have to be paired with a Whoop Lite camera. You can pair this with the Micro V2 or the Nano Cam. It will run any camera. You can put the MIPI connector as long as you need it to be. You could put this in a full-size quad if you could find a 25 by 25 Whoop mount in a full-size quad, but maybe you're doing something like a sub 250 5-inch and you only need 200 milliwatts because that is the maximum output power of this, and you don't plan on doing anything that doesn't include an option for 2 to 3S voltage. That's kind of the limitation when it comes to this VTX. It only runs on 2 to 3S. Now, for my pork chop, I am running it directly off of VBatt. That's not an option if you're running like a 6S quad, but you can run this VTX off of a 10-volt regulator, something like that, 5-volt regulator if you have enough amps to pull this thing. But it's worth the weight savings because this only weighs around 4.5 grams with the shielding off. With the shielding on, you might be looking at closer to 5 grams. And then you can still pair that with a micro V2 camera, which is the best camera out there right now until some of the new ones come out. And you can get a full 200 milliwatt setup for almost no weight. If you're a racer, that is a heck of a deal because this thing weighs almost nothing. You only need 25 milliwatts and you can run a good camera with it. That's why this thing exists. But it also exists to bring digital to this market. And the thing about micro quads, especially ones like this that are designed for freestyle, they get beat up pretty good. And that's where the durability issues come into play with these small boards from HDZero. There's been a lot of durability complaints with the Whoop board, which is just a bigger version of the Whoop Lite, the race board, and even the Freestyle VTX, which I run all the time. But specifically with the Whoop Lite, I have seen quite a few complaints about durability after crashing. Now, I've never had that happen with my Whoop Lites, and that's because I mount them in a very specific way, which we're gonna cover here. But just so you know, I do crash them pretty hard. And that fail boatload of crashes I just showed you is from one session with the pork chop. That's about 6 packs worth. I've never had anything go wrong with my Whoop Lite VTX or the camera in here because I have mounted it in the recommended way. Now, I think most people that are having a problem are not necessarily considering the best mounting options for this hardware. Yes, there will always be some factory defect. Yes, there is always the rare opportunity to break something completely unforeseen. That does happen. This will not prevent every instance of injury to your VTX. And the principles that I'm going to show you here for this VTX do translate to bigger quads, but we're going to focus on the micros because that's where I've seen the most problems. So let me show you how I've got it mounted and what the recommendations are about mounting and running this VTX so that you can get the most life out of yours and stop spending 54 bucks every time you plow one into the dirt. And the first thing I'm going to show you is right here on the MIPI connector. It's kind of hard to see. There's this substance that I have right here on the edge of the MIPI connector. There's also some back here on the camera. You can't really tell, but where the MIPI connects to the camera, same substance. And back here on the UFL connector for the antenna, there's this substance on it. What is that mysterious substance? And that mystery substance would be Some Goo. Some Goo is your best friend when it comes to MIPI connectors and UFLs. Now, unlike the Freestyle VTX, which has an actual brass plate that goes over the UFL connector to hold it on in a hard crash, and another plate to hold the MIPI, the Whoop Lite has none. It has none of that. Most micros don't have retainers. It's just a fact of the weight and the tightness of the build. But Some Goo is your best friend when it comes to unprotected UFLs and MIPI connectors. This doesn't just apply to HDZero. This stuff is good for everything, even analog. And you can also use E6000, or if you're Nick Burns, you prefer welder. Essentially what this is a glue that never dries. It's a silicone-based glue that you put on something, and although it does dry and harden, it doesn't ever fully dry. And you can pull it off. If you just get a pair of tweezers, you can yank on the edge of it and it'll actually rip off if you give it a little bit of a tug. You don't want to go crazy with it, but just a little bit is enough to hold your MIPI connector on or your UFL in a hard crash. And I think the most common reason why people get ruined Whoop Lite VTXs is because the UFL pops off in a crash. They don't notice, they keep running it, and they burn up the amplifier. Or the MIPI pops off and they don't notice and they wonder why they lose video, and before they have really figured it out, that MIPI connector is already loose, has something in it, and it's ruined the connector or the cable. And it gets expensive to troubleshoot that stuff because you're buying new cables, you're buying new cameras, and you're buying new VTXs just to figure out what's wrong. But if you just throw a little bit of this stuff on first, you save yourself a whole lot of hassle because those things are not gonna pop off. And if you ever do need to get them off, like I said, just a pair of tweezers and some light yanking. Don't yank it too hard. Yanking it too hard becomes a problem. We'll get that stuff right off and you can pop it off like nothing was ever on it without pulling any other components off. It's actually a really, really great tip. My #1 tip for installing not just HDZero VTXs, but anything with an unprotected UFL or MIPI connector. And my next tip is to run the covers if you can on the Whoop Lite VTX. Now, you'll notice that I'm not running the cover on the side facing the flight controller, and that's actually the top of the board with the HDZero logo. I'm facing it upside down because I wanted the MIPI to be available to the top as well as the UFL on this side. But I am running the cover facing outermost of the stack because that way branches and things can't get in there very easily and knock off components. And like I said, I've secured the MIPI and the UFL that are somewhat exposed with my Some Goo. So yeah, run the cover if you can get away with it. And they don't weigh that much, so it's not really too big of a deal to run it. And I am running just one because there wasn't enough room for me to run both and it not contact the flight controller. I think you're gonna find that that's a pretty common scenario, especially in shorter builds, which the pork chop is, or tiny whoops where you just don't have a lot of room because you've got to put a canopy on top and you're trying to keep it as compact as possible so your camera isn't way up in the air. But running a can facing the top is going to be your best bet. And they do just pop off. So don't feel like you need to make a decision and you can't go back and you're gonna cut the thing off. You can always pop the shield off and fit it in there, see if it's gonna work. Pop the shield on and fit it in again and see if it's gonna work before you tighten everything down. Definitely try to run at least the topmost shield if you can get away with it. And for my next tip, be sure to run the included gummies. Don't try to just put this thing over the screws and use what gumminess is underneath from the flight controller gummy and just a nylon nut at the top. Run the gummies. Gummies are absolutely your friend when it comes to HDZero boards. And on top of that, when you do use a nylon nut on top of the gummy, make sure that once it is completely tight, meaning that you have a little bit of give. You see how much give I have there? That's nice and springy. Plenty of room for that thing to shake and take a bump. But my nut isn't super duper tight. I'm not cramming it on there. I have got it tight enough to retain it where it doesn't move too far forward if I spring it up. And then I've put a little bit of my Some Goo right on top of the nut so this nut doesn't back out. It becomes basically a semi-permanent stop for the gummy stack that I have here. And I did have to cut some of the flight controller gummy in order to get this gummy from the HDZero Whoop Lite down enough, but I didn't want to undersize this because there are components on the bottom of the board that in a hard crash may come into contact with the flight controller. So I wanted to make sure there was enough distance and I had enough gummy here to make that not happen. And essentially all I mean by this is look out for the spacing between your Whoop Lite board and your AIO. Make sure you do not cut the gummies that HDZero provides. If you're gonna cut a gummy, cut the ones underneath it, not the ones that come with the HDZero board. You wanna leave enough spacing. Because I think most of us are gonna be running the Whoop Lite on top of the AIO and not under it. It just makes the most sense for micro builds. And we're not gonna be running the can. Realistically, we're not gonna run the can on the bottom side. There's just not gonna be enough room. And I'm not on this build. But as you saw, there's enough room for me to compress it. And I made sure that as I compressed it, there was no meeting of the components underneath. Because that is a surefire way to knock a capacitor or resistor off the board. And then you're essentially done for it. Because you're not gonna find it and you're gonna be buying another VTX. It's like a needle in a haystack, and you're probably not equipped to do surface mount soldering or finding the component from a schematic or any of that you don't want to be doing for the cost of a $54 VTX. And then once you have all that lined up, you normally put a nylon nut on the top. Just use a little Some Goo to lock it in place so that it doesn't back out on you and you lose it, because then your VTX is flopping around and it creates a whole other problem. that's essentially it for that tip. And for my last tip, it's actually going to be about performance of the VTX, and that is to try to run it off VBatt if you can. You can kind of see in here, this solder joint back here, this is my main ground to my power lead. This one right here actually goes to my Whoop Lite VTX. It goes under the board and over to the solder joints on this side. And I have the same thing done for power on this side here. You can see my main, and then right where the capacitor is connected, I attached the power leads for my Whoop Lite board. And I know it is contrary to popular belief to run a VTX off of VBatt. I would not tell you to do that if it were a 6S quad because the voltage spikes are way out there, but on a 1S or 2S quad, it really makes the most sense to run this thing off of VBatt because the 5-volt rail is probably going to be rated to pull the 1 amp that this requires to run on 200 milliwatts. It's about an amp that it pulls at 5 volts. But if you look at a 1S quad, it's already using a step-up regulator to get to 5 volts in the first place, and that power is not going to be consistent or clean. Plus, it's already running other things off that 5-volt rail on the board. A lot of times our receiver's built in there as well. It's just a mess. Just run it off of the leads instead, but make sure you have a capacitor. In the case of my pork chop, I have the small capacitor that Darwin had with the board because that's what AIO I have in here. Don't run it capless, but definitely run it off of the power leads. Now, if you're running it on a much bigger quad, say you're using a race quad and it's 6S, and you're using your 10-volt rail or your 5-volt rail, that is perfectly fine. Use your rail for the VTX. But if you're doing it on a 1S or 2S, use the leads. Otherwise, I've seen things like sparkles happen. People wonder why their Whoop Lite has these weird sparkles, or sometimes they even brown out mid-flight, which is a problem. You don't want that to happen to you. Just run it off the power leads. But that's essentially it. That's how to get the most life out of your Whoop Lite VTX. And yeah, this is an awesome VTX. I have had no quality issues. I have owned 6 of them now, I believe, and had no problems with any of them. They are all mounted very similar to this with all the same recommendations that I just gave you. And if you do those things outside of factory defect problems, which are bound to happen in FPV, you have to remember BetaFPV does exist and no quality control is sometimes a problem in FPV, but these aren't made by a company like BetaFPV. I trust HDZero a lot more to do everything they can to produce quality components. They just aren't made for scale. They're not made to mass produce 1 million of them and stock all of the stores, and it is very apparent when you go to look for components, because if you break one of these, you may have to wait a while before you see one in stock, and that can be a problem. So do these things that I said to avoid breaking it in the first place, and you're gonna have a lot better time with your Whoop Lite VTX. Most of these things also apply, like I said, to the full-size Freestyle VTX, the 1-watt version, as well as the Race 200 milliwatt VTX and the Whoop 200 milliwatt VTX, the same soft mounting. Now there are no shields on the Whoop or Race VTX, but the Freestyle VTX does have shields. Never take the shields off of your Freestyle VTX and run it unless you would like to fry an egg on top of it, because it will get insanely hot if you try to do that. So just go out, fly it like you stole it, and enjoy your Whoop Lite VTX as much as I do. Don't forget to get a tube of shoe goo, which I think you can get even at Walmart in the actual shoe section. It's literally made for fixing shoes, because this stuff comes in handy on so many levels. You'll find yourself using it all the time if you aren't already using E6000 or Welder by Nick Burns' recommendation, because those are basically the exact same glues. This is just, I know, available in all kinds of weird places. So if you only have weird places in the town you live, shoe goo might be your bet if you can't find E6000 or Welder. But like I said, go run this thing like you stole it. And I recently did. All those crashes that I showed you very early on in the video were actually part of a much larger session that I had a lot of fun in and actually flew some nice packs. So I'm gonna share with you some of the footage that I got off of my Whoop Lite VTX and the Whoop Lite camera in my pork chop, running my pork chop build on 2S. And if you are interested, after watching this little bit of front yard rippage I'm gonna show you, in building your own toothpick for freestyle, I will link a video in my description about the HD conversion on my little pork chop build, which goes over all the specs and the components I used to build it in the first place. But here is some ripping with ye olde HDZero Whoop Lite VTX.
My mind is playing tricks and you know why. I say I didn't even say the night, no. Yeah, I was someone new and baby, it's fine. I know what I want. Dropped a naughty, but you never came through. Then you pull up drunk at something past 2. Now you know that shit, it really ain't you, but I know what I want. These games you playing, they just messing with my mind. But you can play this game, so fucking roll the dice. I'll never get you la. I'll never get you la. These games you playing, they just messing with my mind. You messing with my. I should really go and meet someone new, but every time I do I wanna text you, no. It's a relapse that I never get through. I wish I could stop. You're like therapy with no solution. You're a remedy that's fucking useless. You told me lies in the bottom. I thought I knew what I wanted, so these games you playing, they just messing with my mind. But you can play this game, so fucking roll the dice. I'll never get you la. I'll never get you la. These games you playing, they just messing with my mind. You're messing with my.
Well, that's all I got. Go play with your HDZero gear and do not fear about breaking it. Because if you're mounting it correctly and you are taking into consideration all the possibilities in which it can crash and trying to mitigate those possibilities, it lasts a lot longer than a lot of people think. There are, again, some issues with factory defects or quality control problems that are completely outside of anybody's hands in companies so small as what we have to deal with in FPV. But if you were doing the things that I showed you, you should get a lot more life out of your Whoop Lite VTX. If you'd like to see the same video, but about the other VTXs, specifically the Freestyle VTX, I have a lot of pointers on that one as well. Let me know in the comments below. If this video has been helpful, feel free to give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe. And if you don't know already, I do have a Patreon, which helps me continue to make these videos without having to form any kind of unsavory relationships with vendors to pay me money to talk about their gear, because I like to have a completely unbiased opinion about the things I talk about. Just like this HDZero Whoop Lite VTX here. It was not given to me, so I am free to talk about it because my patrons support it. And speaking of those patrons, it's time to shame them. They thought I forgot. I waited till the very end of this video to shame them, but now it is time to shame them because they give me the money every month to make these ridiculous videos. I don't know why they keep doing it, but they keep doing it, and there are 8 of them now, and I appreciate them all, but the way I show appreciation is by shaming them. And I shame them by photoshopping them onto strips of bacon in a weird scene and then reading their names in a strange, robotic-y, reverby way. So here that is, what they deserve for giving me some of their money.
FPV, Free Range Chicken RC, Crash and Burn FPV, Dylan H, TS13 FPV, Chad FPV, Logan R, Sweet Will.
But seriously, I do greatly appreciate the people whose names I just read, because they do make it possible for me to talk about all of these kinds of things without having to please any vendors. because I don't want to have to please vendors. I would like to have my own opinion, and these people make that possible because running a channel is not free. It is not a cheap venture, and other than the enjoyment I get from making stupid, idiotic, rambling videos, it doesn't pay the bills that the channel incurs. So thank you so much if one of your names is the ones that I read. And if not, if you'd like to be a patron of mine, the link is in the description and your name just may find its way onto some bacon in the future. But that's all I have. Thank you all so much for hanging in there. I hope you enjoy your HDZero Whoop Lite. I hope you think about building a Freestyle Toothpick because it is one of the ultimate ripping experiences I've ever had, and I fly a lot of drones. But until next time, stay greasy, and I'll catch you later.
Oops.